a mystery from 12,000 years ago that turned human history upside down. Göbekli Tepe, located in the Jurmis Mountains of southeastern Anatolia. It is situated on a rocky mountain peak in Upper Mesopotamia, the region where the world's oldest agricultural community emerged. When Göbekli Tepe was formed, the climate in this area was warmer and more humid than it is today. This archaeological site was surrounded by vast grasslands, rich in wild grains such as wheat and barley. And there were herds of grazing animals like wild sheep, wild goats, gazelles, and horses. A large herd of gazelles may have passed through this archaeological site due to seasonal migrations. There is no evidence that there were significant forests nearby. 90% of the charcoal recovered from this archaeological site comes from pistachio or almond trees. Like most of the pre-pottery Neolithic PPN sites in this region, Göbekli Tepe was built on a high point at the edge of the mountain, allowing for a wide view of the plains below and making it easily visible from the plains as well. Thanks to this location, the builders were able to easily obtain raw materials like flint needed to make tools for processing the soft limestone bedrock, and limestone used to construct the complex. The prehistoric village obtained drinking water through a rainwater harvesting system made up of carved channels, which was supplied by several water tanks carved into the bedrock beneath the site. It could hold at least 150,000 liters of water. Excavations were conducted on the southern slope of the site, from the south and west, but archaeological discoveries were made throughout the entire plateau. Göbekli Tepe, interpreted as a monumental public facility, was built by hunter-gatherer groups during the Neolithic period, 10,000 to 9,000 BC, when pottery was not yet developed. This monument was likely used in relation to social events and rituals, and some of its features include unique T-shaped limestone pillars that reach heights of up to 5.5 meters. Some of the pillars abstractly depict human forms, with low reliefs of clothing such as belts and loincloths, as well as high and low reliefs of wild animals. Recent excavation work has also revealed the remains of a non-monumental structure believed to originate from a residential building. The site, measuring 15 meters in height and covering an area of 8 hectares, was densely covered with structures, small buildings, quarries, and stone water tanks, and it also shows traces of activities from later periods. The first excavator of this site, Klaus Schmidt, described it as a sanctuary used by a group of nomadic hunter-gatherers in a vast area with few or no permanent residents. Recent excavators interpret Göbekli Tepe as a settlement based on recent discoveries, such as residential structures and features, water supply facilities, and Neolithic tools for habitation. This site shows the emergence of the oldest permanent human settlement in the world. Prehistoric scholars associate this Neolithic revolution with the emergence of agriculture, but there are differing opinions on whether agriculture caused people to settle or the other way around. Göbekli Tepe, built on a rocky mountain peak, currently has no clear evidence of agricultural cultivation and has played an important role in this debate. According to archaeological evidence, it appears that the residents processed grains at this site, but it is unclear whether they were wild or cultivated. The definite purpose of the megalithic enclosure has not been determined. Schmidt described it as the world's first temple, but he mistakenly speculated that it was intentionally and consciously refilled. Recent geological studies suggest that the slope was filled as it slid, and it has been repaired and modified from time to time since then. Architecture and iconography are not only found at this site. Similar archaeological sites like Karahan Tepe have been discovered in more than 6 locations throughout modern Şanlıurfa province, and they are believed to date from roughly the same period. This archaeological site was first discovered in a survey in 1963. Schmidt recognized its importance in 1994 and began excavations the following year. After his death in 2014, the work continued as a joint project under the direction of Turkish prehistorian Necmi Karul, involving Istanbul University, the Şanlıurfa Museum, and the German Archaeological Institute. As of 2015, less than 5% of the site has been excavated. As of 2015, less than 5% of the archaeological site has been excavated. Through geophysical surveys, it was found that there are at least 20 large enclosures on the hill where the ruins are located. The beginning of the establishment of the Göbekli Tepe village. The PPN pre-pottery Neolithic culture, which began around the end of the last ice age, represents the beginning of village life and is the earliest evidence of permanent human settlement in the world. Archaeologists have long associated the emergence of these settlements with the Neolithic Revolution, the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture. But there is no consensus on whether the adoption of agriculture led people to settle, or whether settling led people to adopt agriculture. There is no consensus on whether settling led people to adopt agriculture. The Neolithic Revolution in Southwest Asia lasted for a long time and was regionally diverse. Elements of village life appeared in places that were 10,000 years before the Neolithic period, and the transition to agriculture took thousands of years, with varying speeds and trajectories across regions. Archaeologists divide the pre-pottery Neolithic period into two phases: A, PPNA, around 9600 to 8800 BC, and B, PPNB, around 8800 to 7000 BC. The earliest phase of Göbekli Tepe is estimated to be the PPNA, followed by the PPNB phase. The inhabitants of Göbekli Tepe were hunter-gatherers who supplemented their diet with early forms of domesticated grains and lived in the village for at least part of the year. Tools such as grinding stones and mortars found at the site have been analyzed, suggesting significant grain processing. Tools such as grinding stones and mortars found at the site have been analyzed, suggesting significant grain processing. Paleontological evidence shows a large-scale gazelle hunt between midsummer and autumn. The PPN village mainly consisted of houses made of stone or mud bricks, but there were also significant monuments and large buildings at times. This includes the tower and walls of Tel es Sultan Jericho, as well as large circular buildings from nearly the same period at Göbekli Tepe, Nevali Chori, Chayunu, Wadi Feynan 16, Jerf el Ahmar, Tel Aber 3, and Tepe Asyab. Archaeologists generally associate these structures with communal activities, and as the PPN community grew in size, they helped maintain social interactions, along with the collective effort required to build them. The T-shaped pillar tradition seen at Göbekli Tepe is only found in the Urfa region, but most of the PPN sites there include it. This includes Nevali Chori, Hamzan Tepe, Karahan Tepe, Harbetsuvan Tepesi, Sefer Tepe, and Tasli Tepe. This includes Nevali Chori, Hamzan Tepe, Karahan Tepe, Harbetsuvan Tepesi, Sefer Tepe, and Taslu Tepe. The characteristic T-shaped stones have been identified at contemporaneous archaeological sites further away, including Chayonu, Kermezder, and Gusir Hoyuk. The stratigraphic model of Göbekli Tepe by Klaus Schmidt is composed of 3 layers. The large circular enclosure is estimated to date back to 10,000 BC PPNA and is situated on the 3rd layer. The smaller rectangular structure and the abandoned state of the site have been assigned to the 2nd layer, dating back to 9000 BC, early to mid PPNB. The 1st layer has been established as all Neolithic activities up to the modern surface. This stratigraphic model by Klaus Schmidt is no longer used due to the latest theories. The revised classification model consists of 8 stages, spanning at least 1,500 years. This includes detailed information about the history of large circular enclosures, events that led to the modification or abandonment of the enclosures, and the evolution of residential buildings surrounding them. Stage 1. The earliest settlement phase dates back to the late 10,000 BC, which includes the first versions of circular enclosures A, B, C, and D, as well as circular oval residential structures that represent a semi-sedentary lifestyle. Step 2. Around 9000 BC, the fence between A and D was significantly modified. A new wall incorporating the first integrated T-shaped columns was built. Although most were oval-shaped, an increasing number of houses were being constructed with a tendency towards rectangular floor plans. A new wall incorporating the first integrated T-shaped columns was built. Although most were oval-shaped, an increasing number of houses were being constructed with a tendency towards rectangular floor plans. Steps 3 through 5. In the initial PPNB, rectangular residential structures were built on the northern and western slopes. Several construction phases were undertaken, such as adding benches integrated with T-shaped pillars and creating new interior walls to make more rectangular rooms. The large fence was also modified. Walls were repaired and new walls were added. Benches were placed on the inner side. By the end of the initial PPNB, a landslide on the slope flooded the lower structures with sediment and household debris, possibly including garbage heaps and burials. This caused extensive damage to Fence D, and stabilization work was carried out in Stage 5. Building C was finally reconstructed, and a terrace wall was installed on top to prevent future landslides on the slope. Nevertheless, a second major landslide event likely occurred, leading to the abandonment of Fence D in the late 9th millennium BCE.
Several construction phases were undertaken, such as adding benches integrated with T-shaped pillars and creating new interior walls to make more rectangular rooms. The large fence was also modified. The wall was repaired and a new wall was added. A bench was placed on the inner side of the second stage wall. Towards the end of the initial PPNB, a landslide on the slope flooded the lower structures with sediment and household debris, possibly including piles of garbage and buried items. As a result, Fence D was extensively damaged and stabilization work was carried out in Stage 5. Building C was finally rebuilt and a terrace wall was installed on top to prevent future landslides on the slope. Nevertheless, a second major landslide event occurred, which likely led to Fence D being abandoned in the late 9th millennium BC. Stages 6 and 7. Construction activities gradually decreased during Stages 6 and 7, late 9th millennium BCE to early 8th millennium BCE. Due to the loss of areas B and D, it is possible that buildings G and the Lion Column building were constructed. In Stage 7, another terrace wall was built as a final attempt to stabilize the northern slope. Due to the loss of areas B and D, it is possible that buildings G and the Lion Column building were constructed. In Stage 7, another terrace wall was built as a final attempt to stabilize the northern slope. Step 8. In the final occupancy period, Step 8 saw the construction of small houses in an abandoned Neolithic village. The first circular complex at Göbekli Tepe appeared in the late 10th millennium BC. The diameter ranges from 10 to 30 meters. The most notable feature is the T-shaped limestone pillars, evenly placed within thick inner walls made of unworked stone. So far, 4 such circular structures have been excavated. According to geophysical surveys, there are about 200 pillars in total, including 16 more surrounding each of the maximum 8 pillars. The slabs were transported from a bedrock pit about 100 meters away at the top of the hill, and the workers used stone tools to cut the limestone bedrock. This pillar is the oldest megalithic monument in the world. In the center of each circle, there are 2 taller pillars standing facing each other. It is uncertain whether there was a roof over the circle. A stone bench designed for sitting was found inside. Many of the pillars are carved with abstract and enigmatic hieroglyphs and animal reliefs. Pictograms represent sacred symbols that are generally understood, as seen in Neolithic cave paintings from other places. The relief depicts mammals such as lions, bulls, wild boars, foxes, gazelles, and donkeys, as well as reptiles like snakes, arthropods such as insects and spiders, and birds, especially eagles. Eagles also appear in the sculptures of Çatalhöyük and Jericho. The artworks of Göbekli Tepe rarely feature human-like figures. Some of the T-shaped pillars have human arms carved on the lower part, but the excavator Schmidt speculated that this was meant to represent a stylized human, or perhaps a deity. The lower parts of some pillars show loincloths. Schmidt believes that the horizontal slab at the top symbolizes the shoulders, which suggests that the figure has been left without a head. It is unclear whether they were intended to serve as surrogate worshippers, symbolize revered ancestors, or express supernatural and personified beings. Some of the floors in this oldest layer are made of terrazzo limestone, while others are made of a high relief carved from bedrock to support a pair of central columns. Radiocarbon dating results suggest that this early circular building was constructed around 9000 BC. The later enclosures took on a rectangular shape to utilize space more efficiently compared to the circular structure. These are often associated with the emergence of the Neolithic period, but the presence of T-shaped posts, a key feature of earlier enclosures, indicates that the building continued to serve the same function in the culture during the late Neolithic PPNB. The adjacent rectangular rooms, which have no doors or windows, feature a glossy limestone floor reminiscent of Roman terrazzo. Carbon dating results suggest it dates back to between 8800 and 8000 BC. Evidence of the collapse incident at Göbekli Tepe, the fence located more than 10 meters below the highest area of the settlement, experienced several landslides during the occupation period of Göbekli Tepe. In particular, a serious incident occurred towards the end of the early PPNB, resulting in Fence D being flooded with debris from residential structures and sediment, including burial sites and garbage piles. As a result, the fence was severely damaged and had to be repaired. Afterwards, in building Phase 5, a terrace wall was erected, which may have prevented future damage from such incidents. However, this measure is presumed to have been meaningless, as the fence was likely abandoned due to a second collapse in the late 9th millennium BC, which corresponds to building phase 6. Other fences experienced a similar fate, which may have led to the construction of new fences to replace them. It was previously assumed that the large enclosure was intentionally backfilled, but this interpretation is no longer favoured since the death of Klaus Schmidt. The housing structure of Göbekli Tepe. In the earliest phase of habitation, circular and oval houses were built next to the large enclosure, indicating a semi-sedentary lifestyle. As time passed, the tendency for these buildings to have rectangular floor plans grew stronger. In the final settlement phase, only small structures were erected. Before any burial goods were discovered related to the death and burial at Göbekli Tepe, Schmidt speculated that there might have been a grave in the crevice behind the circular building walls. In 2017, a human skull fragment with incisions was discovered, which has been interpreted as an expression of the widespread skull worship during the Neolithic period. Artifacts in the shape of human skulls made of plaster have been identified at Levant sites such as Jericho, Tel Aswad, and Iftahel, as well as at Çatalhöyük in Anatolia, and are known to date back to the pre-pottery Neolithic period. Another structure mound at Göbekli Tepe. A lion-shaped figure was found at the western end. In this area, flint and limestone sculptures are found more frequently. Therefore, it has been suggested that this place may have been some sort of sculpting workshop. On the other hand, 3 phallic sculptures have been identified in the southern plateau, but their dating is unclear. In addition to the ruins, there is a platform with 2 holes for erecting pillars and a flat bench surrounding it. This platform corresponds to the oldest part of the tell, known as Complex E. It is also referred to as the Rock Temple, because it resembles the cult buildings of Nevalli Chori. The floor is carefully carved from the bedrock and smoothly finished, reminiscent of the terrazzo floors of the Göbekli Tepe complex. To the northwest of this area, there are 2 pits that are considered part of Complex E, resembling water tanks. One of these pits has table-height pins and a 5-step staircase. The uppermost layer of the structural remains after Göbekli Tepe is the shallowest, but occupies the longest time. It consists of hills that have been used almost continuously for agricultural purposes since the operation as a ceremonial centre was halted. Göbekli Tepe lost its significance in the early 8th millennium BCE. With the emergence of agriculture and animal husbandry, there seems to have been a new change in human life in this area, leading to a loss of importance for gathering communities. The construction process of Göbekli Tepe. The plateau where Göbekli Tepe is located has been shaped by erosion and quarrying since the Neolithic period. To the south of the plateau, there are 4 channels measuring 10 metres in length and 20 centimetres in width, which are interpreted as the remains of an ancient quarry where rectangular blocks were extracted. This may be related to the square buildings in the vicinity, of which only the foundations have been preserved. This is likely the remains of a Roman watchtower that was part of Limes Arabicus, the Roman border, but this is just a guess. Most of the structures on the plateau appear to be the result of Neolithic quarrying, and the quarry was used as a source for massive construction. Wedges were driven into the rock, and then the separated blocks were lifted from the rock face using levers. Several quarries where round artifacts were produced have been identified. Evidence of the quarry was confirmed when a 3 by 3 metre piece was found on the southeastern slope of the plateau. 3 T-shaped pillars that have not yet been lifted from the bedrock were remnants from the Neolithic period. The largest pillar is located in the northern plateau. It is 7 metres long and 3 metres wide at the top. Its weight is estimated to be around 50 tonnes. The 2 unfinished pillars are located on the southern plateau. Archaeologists do not agree on how much labour was required to construct the ruins. Schmidt argued that quarrying, transporting and erecting the heavy, monolithic and almost universally well-prepared limestone pillars would be difficult for a small number of people. He estimated that hundreds of people would have been needed just to move the pillars, referencing the experiments conducted by Thor Heyerdahl on the Moai of Rapa Nui. According to this experiment, it was estimated that 20 people would be needed to carve a moai similar in size to the T-shaped pillars of Göbekli Tepe, and 50 to 75 people would be required to transport it over 15 kilometres in a week. Schmidt's team also cited a record from 1917 when 525 people took 3 days to construct a megalithic monument on Nias Island in Indonesia. These estimates support the interpretation that this site was constructed under the coercion or allure of a small religious elite, utilising a large, non-resident labour force. However, other researchers estimate that it would have been possible to move the pillars with just 7 to 14 people, using techniques similar to those used to construct other monuments like Stonehenge, along with ropes and water or other lubricants. Experiments conducted at Göbekli Tepe itself suggest that all currently exposed PPNB structures could have been built by 12 to 24 people within 4 months, including the time spent quarrying and gathering stones and preparing food. These labour estimates are thought to fall within the capabilities of a single extended family or village community during the Neolithic period. Additionally, this aligns with the number of people who could comfortably fit inside one of the buildings at the same time. According to Hackley and Gopher, fences B, C, and D were initially planned as a single-layer complex, forming an equilateral triangle. At Göbekli Tepe, flint artifacts are scattered from the summit of the ridge down to the slope. The discovered tools are similar to those found at other Neolithic sites in the northern Levant. In 1963, over 3,000 Neolithic tools were discovered, most of which were high-quality flint tools, with a very small number of obsidian artifacts also excavated. Stone tools, various blades, scrapers, shovels, and arrowheads were the most common types of tools. About 700 tools were discovered during the excavation of Space 16, a small building adjacent to Area D. Scrapers, awls, shovels, and grinding stones were identified. As a result of examining the stones found in the soil, over 7,000 grinding stones, which are presumed to have been used for processing grains, were discovered, and these grinding stones were used throughout the entire period during which this site was maintained. However, it is unclear whether the grains were wild or cultivated. Fragments of the column, iconic from Göbekli Tepe. The stone pillars inside the fence are T-shaped, similar to other earthenware Neolithic sites in the area. However, unlike other sites, many of the pillars are carved. Generally, they are shallow reliefs, but sometimes there are deep reliefs as well. Most of the sculptures depict animals, primarily snakes, foxes, and wild boars, but also include gazelles, mouflons, wild sheep, onagers, ducks, and eagles. The identifiable animals are mostly males and are often depicted in aggressive postures. Abstract shapes are also depicted, most of which are vertical or horizontal H-shaped symbols, but there are also crescent moons and discs. It is rare to describe humans. Column 43 in Zone D features a headless man and an upright phallus. However, the T-shape of the column itself is anthropomorphized. In other words, the body is the torso and the top is the head. It can be confirmed that some columns include not only animal reliefs, but also sculptures of arms, hands, and loincloths. The 2 central columns are special in the symbolic architecture of the fence. The pillar of fence D represents a human dressed in a piece of cloth that covers the arms, belt, and genitals. The gender of the depicted individual is not clearly identifiable, but Schmidt suggested that they are 2 men because the belt they wore was a male attribute of that era. There is only one clear representation of a woman depicted nude on the slab. Schmidt and animal archaeologist Joris Peters argued that the diversity of animals depicted on the pillars may indicate that a single symbol was not expressed. They suggest that many of the animals depicted in the drawings are predators, which could mean that the stones served to ward off evil or acted as totems through some form of magical expression. The carved structures of Göbekli Tepe also show several small carved stones that generally cannot be attributed to any specific era. The iconography of such structures is similar to that of columns, mostly depicting animals, but also depicting humans, primarily male. A totem pole dating back to the early PPNB was discovered in one of the structures. When reassembled, it stands 192 centimeters tall and has a diameter of 30 centimeters. 3 figures are depicted here from top to bottom: a headless predator, a bear or a large feline, a human neck and arms, another headless figure, possibly a male, with human arms, and a third figure with a fully intact head. Snakes are carved on both sides. Klaus Schmidt's interpretation of the ruins of Göbekli Tepe is that Göbekli Tepe was a mountainous sanctuary of the Stone Age. It was a space for the worship of the dead, and the carved animals are believed to be there to protect the deceased. The slaughtered bones found in large quantities from local game, such as deer, gazelles, pigs, and geese, are presumed to be waste from food prepared for the worshippers, either through hunting and cooking or other means. According to animal archaeological analysis, gazelles were present in the area seasonally, suggesting that events such as rituals and feasts may have been timed to occur during periods of highest game availability. Schmidt believed that the construction of Göbekli Tepe contributed to the development of late urban civilization. Schmidt also speculated about the belief system of the group that created Göbekli Tepe, based on comparisons with other temples and settlements. He suggested shamanistic practices and proposed that the T-shaped pillars represent human figures. possibly ancestors, but believed that a fully expressed belief in deities did not develop until it was associated with extensive temples and palaces in later Mesopotamia. This aligns well with the ancient Sumerian belief that agriculture, livestock, and weaving were transmitted to humans from the sacred mountain Ekuru, where the nameless deity Anuna resides. Schmidt identified this story as a primitive Eastern myth that preserves partial memories from the Neolithic period. It is clear that animals and other images do not represent organized violence. In other words, there are no descriptions of hunting raids or injured animals, and the pillar carvings generally prefer powerful creatures like lions, snakes, spiders, and scorpions, rather than prey that societies like deer rely on. Expanding on Schmidt's interpretation that the circular enclosure may represent a sanctuary, Georgiou's semiotic interpretation suggests that the Göbekli Tepe iconography can be inferred as a cosmic creation map that related the community to the surrounding landscape and the universe. The assumption that this site was used strictly for religious purposes and was uninhabited has been challenged by the suggestion that this structure is similar in some ways to the impressive house posts and totem poles of the North American Northwest Coast large plank houses. It was rebutted by the suggestion that it is similar to a large wooden house with pillars. The reason for replacing the old pillars with new stones, buried every few decades as part of the smaller concentric rings inside the old pillars, is not known. According to Remy Haddad, in recent years, the interpretive enthusiasm to view Göbekli Tepe as a ritual center where nomads periodically gather is shifting towards a vision that aligns more closely with other large Neolithic sites of monumental pottery, where ritual and secular functions coexist. It is changing to a vision that is more consistent with what is known about Neolithic sites. For example, with the discovery of residential buildings and rainwater storage systems, the narrative of temples had to be revised. The OUV and inscription criteria of Göbekli Tepe, the outstanding universal value, OUV, of this site, recognized by the World Heritage Committee, is as follows. Criterion 1. The community that built the massive stone structures of Göbekli Tepe lived during one of the most significant turning points in human history, transitioning from a hunter-gatherer lifestyle to the first agricultural communities. The monumental buildings of Göbekli Tepe showcase the creative human genius of this early pre-pottery Neolithic society. Criterion 2. Göbekli Tepe is one of the earliest expressions of monumental architecture created by humans. This archaeological site often includes decorated T-shaped limestone pillars, demonstrating innovative architectural techniques that also fulfill functional purposes. The images decorating the T-shaped pillars, stone tools, and tunnel calibrators found at Göbekli Tepe are also discovered in contemporary archaeological sites in Upper Mesopotamia, proving the existence of a close social network in the core region of the Neolithic transition. Criterion 4. Göbekli Tepe is an outstanding example of a monumental ensemble of megalithic structures that showcases a significant period in human history. The massive T-shaped pillars were carved from the adjacent limestone plateau, demonstrating a new level of architectural and engineering skill. This is considered evidence of the presence of specialized artisans and the emergence of a more hierarchical form of human society. Reference: UNESCO World Heritage Committee, Göbekli Tepe, Wikipedia, Göbekli Tepe, Instagram, göbekli.tepe.